Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. This is Jordan Pacheco from the Glad Trad podcast. It's Sunday morning, which is why I'm in my Sunday best. And before we get into our continuation on the series of Catholic Masculinity, I just want to take a time to tell you that despite the dispensation, and I think that we'll get into as churches open up about the value of the dispensation, at this point, it's been about 6 months, maybe for some of you even longer, that you've been without what they say is a requirement to go to Mass and therefore the sacraments. But we know for our own Christian lives that the sacraments are the ordinary means of salvation, that they help us conform our life to the life of the saints and the life of Christ. And so I had a conversation with someone very close to me, and he was like, well, I instead of going to Mass, maybe I'll just watch it online on Sunday. And I thought, wow, what a dire strait the church must be in if that is what Catholics are doing as an option now. So I encourage you, I do not care about the dispensation. We shouldn't just be following the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. And the fact of the matter is that the church knows that we need the sacraments. And that's why the church dispenses it. That's why Christ has given the authority to the church to dispense the sacraments. So if you are without confession for 6 months, and I can't imagine confession without a month, nevertheless 6. Imagine all the shenanigans that we all get up to. But to be without the Eucharist, especially, to be without holy water in some cases, everything, it will change the complete function of what it means for us to be a Catholic. Our lives in the Catholic faith are sacramental. So I encourage you this Sunday to really make an effort. Well, this will come out a little later, but next Sunday, I encourage you really to search out and finally go to Mass if you haven't been going to Mass. And look, I'm a traditional Catholic. I know the importance of finding a good Orthodox Latin Mass in my area. For a lot of you who are watching, I know that that's not the case. So the point is that the sacraments, regardless if they're in the Latin Mass or in the Novus Ordo, confer grace. So just get to Mass. It's the most important thing that we can do for our souls. It sets us in the rhythm and repetition what we're supposed to do. And it also tells us not to be afraid, right? When Christ appears to the apostles in the upper room, he tells them first and foremost, do not be afraid. And this message of do not be afraid is all over the Gospels. When our angel Gabriel appears to Mary, what does he say? He says, do not be afraid. And so it's regardless of how we've let fear dominate the church right now. And there's a great serious topic that we'll have to get into. We as Catholics, we in our own personal lives, in our own spiritual battles, cannot be afraid. And so the first step is deciding that the pandemic is not greater than God's mercy. The pandemic isn't as greater as God's salvation, that the bishop's word and authority is not greater than God's. And so therefore, we have an obligation to ourselves and to our souls and to our families to get to Mass. So if you haven't, please get to Mass. Please suss it out. It's time that we fill the churches and really just stick it to the state, which thinks it has now control over liturgy. The second thing is that I want to thank so many of you for watching, sharing, and meditating on the video that I put out, the first in the series on Catholic masculinity, which was the hard truth about pornography. And as you can see, it's been by far our most successful video on our channel. And I think that most of that is because of the subject, that we as Catholic men don't really have a space where we can talk earnestly and honestly about the dangers of pornography. And it was absolutely amazing, not just how many people decided to watch and really take that into consideration, but I got a lot of feedback, and I got a lot of people, a lot of young men who were from all walks of life, people that I knew, people that I didn't know, who were struggling with pornography or are struggling with pornography. And they felt that this was a bit of camaraderie when so much of the sin hides behind closed doors in shame and disgust. So I just want to say that thank you for all those. I hope you really take into consideration the tools that I hope I was able to point you to may help you in your own battle. The most important thing that we can do is really pray and really put our trust in our Lord and in our Blessed Lady to win this fight for us. But also it's going to take our effort too. So if you are still struggling with pornography, if you know a brother who you think the video would be good for, if you just want to share to help support the channel, all these things would be extremely beneficial. And for those who reached out and talked, I'm very honored and very blessed to have heard your stories. Men who I didn't expect had a problem, men who are considerably holier than me, who are considerably better sons of the church than I feel, reaching out and thanking me and also sharing their own struggles. And it's rooted in so many different things. But the fact of the matter is that the way that we beat the devil is we beat him together. Christ says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in their midst. And that's the one thing that Satan tries to do with sin, is he tries to isolate it. So we can't talk about pornography, or we can't talk about domestic violence, or we can't talk about drunkenness, or as we'll get to, the cardinal virtues, the lack of the cardinal virtues. And so what's very funny is I think that the more that we're able to even just online congregate together, and conjugate, vocabulary is important, the more the devil hates it, and the more that we do give honor to Holy Mother Church and to God by publicly renouncing sin and then staying inside a community that helps us. So please pray for everybody who struggles with pornography, men and women. Pray for me. I pray for you. And even one soul who is off of pornography, even one soul who does not have to worry about that thing, is something that the devil will wail over. Remember, I said in the last video, when you are in the devil's clutches, he doesn't need to work very hard to keep you there, right? So it's when we step out, when we decide to turn our lives back to Christ, and we take steps and measures in place to actually inflict damage, that's when the devil starts kicking. That's when the temptations come back even harder than before. That's when things that never used to bother you, things that never used to tempt you, will come out of the woodwork. To give an example, this happens every single Mass, but at the moment of consecration, right, where the priest is elevating the bread and the wine to become the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord, that's a moment that Satan uses to try to kick me with distraction one last time. And it's always the most disgusting, the most profane thoughts ever. And I'm not the only one that this happens to. This happens to my fiance as well. There is something about Satan knowing what's happening on the altar, knowing that his head's going to get crushed, and wanting so hard to grab your soul. And so I always pray to Our Lady, and I pray to St. Michael. The St. Michael prayer is a minor exorcism, in case you didn't know. So it's very nice is that in those moments of temptation, if you pray these prayers, you will be delivered. Our Lady will crush the head of the serpent. We know that. And St. Michael has already thrust Satan out of hell with a third of his angels. So these guys kind of our speciality are kicking Satan out of our thoughts and our minds. And so that's just something that I know happens to me, is I'll be sitting there looking at the elevation, really trying to conform myself to Christ. And it's like, bam, you can feel the doors of your soul being knocked on. So it's important. And again, in this whole fight, we don't talk enough about spiritual warfare. So it's time to get a solid prayer life, but it also means that we have to be physically arduous. And again, if you haven't seen the video, go ahead and watch the hard truth about pornography. There are resources there to help you. And more importantly, be good and kind and great to your brothers who are also struggling with this. This is probably the most serious sin for all of us as young men. I'm sure that if we could actually hear the walls of confession, this is probably the most common sin for men. And it doesn't have to be, but it won't be if and only if we conform our lives to Christ and we put our trust in God. So I'm very honored and thankful that you would watch that, and that's why you're back. So thank you so much. Okay, so continuing with authentic Catholic masculinity, authentic Catholic manhood, the one thing that the culture really doesn't want. Let's step back and talk a little bit about the underlying roots of what makes a man a man. So, you'll get a lot of different videos and a lot of different sources. There are people who think that being a man means physical externalities. Does he have the ability to grow a beard? Does he work out, right? Does he talk in a low voice? Does he drink beer, or does he like appletinis instead? That sort of thing. Now, we know that the physical externalities are important, right? It's important to take care of our bodies. It's important to take care of our minds and our souls as well. But this isn't to say that the body just needs to be completely cast aside. But authentic manhood in the Catholic realm, especially, because this is the realm which Christ wants us to be, melts away from the physical externalities. Because remember that we are dust, and unto dust we shall return. You can be as manly looking and as fit and as strong, and you can drink anybody under the table, or you can work out until you're blue in the face or anything, but the body will wither up, and it is about the soul at the end of the day, And let's be honest here, just because a man looks good doesn't mean that his interior life is good. There are a lot of men who are at the peak of their fitness, or at the peak of their game. And of course, it's not just the physical. Great amount of manhood we find is placed a lot of times in our work, because we associate our work with our vocation. So there's something about getting a job and working hard and doing all the right things and everything. And that too is important, but it's not the most important thing. The soul takes precedent over all of this, and our interior lives take importance over these other factors like, do I have the good job? Do I have the good wife? Do I have the good car? Do my friends and my family respect me? Respect, all this kind of stuff. So what does this have to do with the 4 cardinal virtues? Let's define them at first, then we'll kind of break down why I think authentic masculinity lies in being able to completely exude the 4 cardinal virtues. Okay, so they're prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice. So let's break them down a little bit. What's prudence? Prudence is it's related to wisdom. It is the ability to discern the proper course amidst different scenarios and actions. All right. And also that proper course means that prudence means taking proper precautions and having the proper applied force and wisdom to all these different scenarios. Okay. So I'll give the perfect example. A prudent man would probably think twice about going down a dark alleyway at night. Why? Because he knows that there's a probability that something's in the alleyway that's going to upset him or is going to be detrimental to him mentally or physically. So, or in a more theological sense, a prudent man understands, let's talk about pornography again. A prudent man understands that I need to take the measures in place in order for me to curb my addiction to pornography. So a prudent man would do something like get an inhibitor on his phone. A prudent man would get an accountability partner. A prudent man would get to confession right away and be clear because he knows that his soul is in jeopardy. Because that's wisdom. Wisdom is conforming our reality to that which is the reality of Christ. So that's just an example of prudence. The next is fortitude, and fortitude is a really nice one. Fortitude we hear a lot with endurance, ardor, as St. Thomas Aquinas talks about. Courage sometimes is related to fortitude, but it's standing stern for your beliefs in the face of the prevailing storms and the winds. So without intimidation, right? Even in the face of uncertainty. So a man who is exhibiting fortitude, especially in relation to Christ, knows that this is Christ's church, and I will stand up and I will defend it. I will not run away. So part of getting back to Mass and staying in Mass is that fortitude, I think. It is saying, look, the sacraments are more important even than my own health, that I must be willing, as one who may have to be a martyr, who may have to answer red martyrdom or white martyrdom for God. I understand that I'm willing to die for the sake of the gospel. And I'm not gonna be dissuaded from that. I think it's Fortitude. Leave it in the chat below if I'm saying it wrong. Fortitude. I don't know. I'm gonna say a man full of fortitude knows that, you know what, I'm not gonna go to this party. And then see how automatically, right off the bat, fortitude is related to prudence. I'm not gonna go to that party because I know that I'm gonna have to run up against things that are contrary to my beliefs. I know that there's gonna be all these kind of people there who want to get drunk and want to fornicate or want to do something like that. And I'm just not going to do it. Like, these are my beliefs. You can take them or leave them. That's all that there is to it. And there are plenty of examples nowadays of good priests and good bishops who are exhibiting great amount of fortitude. Father James Altman's video on how you can't be a Catholic and vote Democrat and why that is so important for us. That's an example of fortitude in clergy. And we should pray for that for our clergy, especially nowadays when so many of them have seemingly abandoned the most important point of being a priest, which is to extol the sacraments from Christ onto the faithful. Next up is temperance. And temperance can be best understood as restraint and self-control. This is one that I know I struggle with, and I know a lot of guys struggle with. Now, you know, I'm going to tie back to pornography because, again, I think that's such an evocative sin for many of us. But do I have the self-control to say no? Do I have the self-control to have fortitude, to have prudence, and to conform myself to the life of Christ? It's hard, not just outside. It's moderation, and moderation's difficult, right? There are men who struggle with food, right? There are men who struggle with women. I can tell you that, you know, I completely believe I'm going to be in a very, very loving relationship, or loving marriage, I should say, when my fiance and I are married, because we both are very, we like the emotions and we like the senses and all that kind of stuff, right? So we, in our own relationship, in our own engagement, have had to be very, very good about temperance, self-control, right? Because I learned from a priest that, look, making out isn't necessarily a mortal sin, but it can lead to mortal sin. And obviously we should avoid temptations at nearest account. So am I going to allow myself to be carried away with the woman that I love? And it's so easy to, especially that. Dante places lust as the second level of the Inferno. And for a couple of reasons. First off, because the Inferno is, I know I'm going off, but this is important. This is kind of cool. So the Inferno is shaped like a triangle. And so what it means is that these are the sins which are most common, right? So that's why lust is up here, gluttony is up here, envy is up here. I think it's lust, envy, then gluttony. Limbo, of course, at the very top. And the farther down it goes, it's further from God's light, because remember, Mount Purgatorio is oriented, and then it's the heavenly plane. And also, the more sinister the sins get, which is why at the very bottom of hell, Satan is trapped in the ice. Why? Because he is the furthest from God's love, warming love, right? And also, he has the three great betrayers of the world, which is Judas Iscariot, Cassius, and Brutus. Ever Dante, the poet, the classical master. So, this was all just to say that lust is up here at the very top. And what's very funny is there sometimes can feel like a very thin line between love and lust, because on one side you'll hear people who say, well, you shouldn't kiss until you're married because that's part of the marital right. And then there are people who are going, look, you should do everything except sex, essentially, but anything else goes, touching, feeling, whatever. And the answer is that both of those extremes are wrong. That as you'll see with a lot of the virtues, that on too much is the excess, which is wrong, and too little is the deprivation. And so with temperance, it's all about self-control and restraint. And this also means drink. If I know, like when I go out, I only have 2 drinks. I learned that from my dad. Now, I could have more drinks depending on where I am, and it can be situational. California, which is lower at sea level, means that I can drink more than being up here in Colorado, where the air is thinner, where 1 drink will do more. But it's all about just creating a habit of self-control and restraint. And part of what being an authentic man is that self-control. So temperance is a very, very important one, extremely important. And finally, justice. And justice, fairness, is best known as rendering to one what he is due. So if a man works a day's labor, he should be paid a day's wage. And we all think that we have this concept of justice, but what we often do is we often pervert justice, especially now in the political culture and the culture at large, with these adjectives that are supposed to specify justice. But the problem is that these adjectives actually can pervert our very concept of the fairness and impartiality that justice is supposed to have, right? So we'll talk about environmental justice and racial justice and economic justice and gender justice and all these other kinds of things. Justice to the church, justice to the state. And everyone wants to have a glorious crusade on justice. But justice is simple, rendering to each what he is due. So it's about being fair. It's about looking at people and judging them properly, or judging the situation properly. God does this for us, right? So God doesn't give you a pass if you do 100 good deeds, but you commit 1 mortal sin. So unlike something like, say, Egyptian mythology, where it's a weighing of the scales, we know that there's a weighing of scales for our deeds in the book of Revelation. But what does Christ tell us? He says that if you break one facet of the law, it's if you broke all of the law, right? So this is why when people say, let's talk about abortion, right? What's justice? Well, justice is that we should not kill the unborn, right? We should not, for the sake of political or economic or social or cultural status, kill those who are most vulnerable, those who are closest to Christ. In the book of Jeremiah, right? Even before you were in the womb, I knew you. And so what we find oftentimes is people say, well, abortion is one of many different issues. So they put abortion on the same as tax rates or foreign policy or any other subject. The problem is that that's not justice, right? They'll say, well, there are now articles that are coming out saying that the most damaging thing you could do for the environment, the biggest carbon footprint you can leave, is having children, which is why there are a lot of soy boys getting snipped right now. Forgive me for the term, but I'm you know me, I'm not going to back down from that. There are a lot of very, very interesting people in our world now who need a little bit of manly fortitude. So the problem with this whole concept is that we put the concept of justice completely down the toilet for the sake of our own personal perception of justice. And I've said this, so even though the church has a very good history on talking about the importance of conscience as the primordial or the original, how is it defined? I think the church, it's the conscience is the it's the original voice of God, the original moral gauge. You know what term I'm trying to say, but the point being is that conscience is important, right? Because it's right from wrong. That's what we all learned from Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio. But conscience can be malformed, which is why I think that when I hear people talk about how abortion shouldn't be the preeminent issue, I don't think it's because they're evil, that they close the door and they rub their hands. They all know that what the truth is, but they just refuse to. Some of them do, I'm sure. And they refuse to go deeper into it. But I think that it's just malformed conscience, and we know that that's possible. So that's very, very important. So how does this all relate to manhood? Well, the point of a man is that we need to conform our lives to Christ. And the point of a man is that we need to exude in virtue. We have to be men of virtue. And what does it mean to be men of virtue? It means all these 4 cardinal virtues, and there are many other subsequent virtues that flow from these that need to be exhibited. And even just hearing these 4, there are ones that I know I can be better on and ones that I can be worse on. I'm getting better at temperance, for instance. And I don't think I've ever had a real big problem. I mean, as I say, it's like pride, right? But it's not pride. It's just, you know what you have to work on, right? I know that sometimes I need to be better on justice because I'm a very hack and slash kind of guy, right? I'm a very much like a lock up, 'em up, throw away the key. Why don't we bring back the gallows? That sort of thing. And maybe for some cases, this is actually warranted. But again, it takes the working of wisdom, which is prudence, to determine the right kind of course. I don't try to hold grudges. I don't try to make it all about me, but I do see a lot of things in the world, and sometimes I'll go like, well, the church is the church, and ergo, the church has a sort of supremacy, which can be true in some cases. I don't want to knock the church from its pedestal, right, as the one true church that Christ has found, but also I know that real justice is rendering each what he is due. So that includes for the church. So there's great chastising that's happening in the church right now, right? One may look at it and think it's not very just. How is it that the bride of Christ is being ravaged by so many things? Coronavirus causing such a huge decline in the pews. Before coronavirus, a huge lack of presence in the Eucharist, or a belief in the real presence, a huge lack of belief of the sacraments, a widespread polling showing that Catholics support in wide margins anything from abortion to gay marriage to contraception to divorce. Doesn't seem very just, God, but you have to turn and look at it that yes, it is that we are the priests, the bishops, the popes, everything that we have now, our own laity, is precisely because of our own sins. And how is that not rendering to us what is due? And in fact, I remember there's a Milton Friedman quip which he talks about how it's a good thing how we don't actually get what we deserve because we deserve considerably worse. I know I work on temperance a lot, so. Not so much in drink, not so much in food, but certainly in my relationship. And I know that that's something that's going to have to be even to our married life, right? How much is too much? And the answer is that if you're having that question while you're having a tender moment with your darling fiance or girlfriend, then you probably should walk it back. It is better to be safe than sorry, especially when it's regards to another person's soul. So the cardinal virtues are important. And as they relate as far as masculinity, we've seen this great deft of them across the culture. It's wisdom. Wisdom has been completely left the building in a lot of ways. And I think that we can see that those who are going to stand up and tell the truth, who are going to have the right kind of discretion and caution, are oftentimes burned out. And especially now, because our culture is so charged with one side or the other, right? So oftentimes having the wisdom to discern between fake news and real news, or discern between those who are yelling at you to take action and those who are telling you that you better not take action, can be a little bit difficult. And as men especially, we like to believe in crusades. As Catholic men especially, we love the idea of all of us being crusaders, which I think is what Fortitude plays in with us a little bit. But one of the great problems is that we need to have the right kind of crusade. I've always said that I think the first crusade was justified. I think the political machinations of a couple of the other ones made them considerably more suspect. But we have to always keep in mind what that road looks like that God wants us to set on. And so I see that all across. Temperance is most assuredly gone. There is no self-control. And you can determine this not just in our sexual ethics, which is absurd now. I talked about cuties last video, and how now if you think that children shouldn't be sexualized, which makes a lot of sense, that the self-control of the culture has completely left the room, you're called a traditional Christian fascist right-wing agitator. And I was like, I thought that we were all on the same page about this. But look now, it is virtuous. I mean, look at our music, right? So it's not a coincidence that people like Cardi B, Miley Cyrus, and Nicki Minaj are at the top of the charts at different times. I understand Cardi B is currently there, but it's like, well, what do we see? We see in our music and in our culture and our lifestyles, we see that drunkenness, fornication, anger, violence, wrath, envy, all of the deadly sins, all of them are given out in spades. And in fact, to exude any sort of temperance, to pull yourself back, you are suddenly looked at as a prude. You're looked at as old-fashioned, fuddy-duddy. They recently attacked Justice Barrett on being she wants to bring back the Handmaid's Tale, and I was like, I don't think anyone understands what authentic Catholicism is saying. But you see this anger, this always want to go balls to the wall and destroy everything in our path, and there's a lack of that kind of temperance. And oftentimes, we're talking about the externals, but think about what it does to our interior life. So, unfortunately, we don't have temperance or self-control even in our own spiritual life, right? So I know that sometimes we want to use our prayer life really just to whine at God. God, I want this. Me. Why is this happening to me? Oh, no. Step back for a second. What is the point of prayer? Well, prayer does two things. It's that conversation with God. It's that open route to God. But why? The ultimate purpose, the second thing, is because it conforms ourselves to God's will. That's what the purpose of prayer is. Whether that prayer is in petition, in reparation, or in thanksgiving, it is supposed to conform ourselves to Christ's will. So it is perfectly acceptable to pray for things. Lord, I before this episode, I prayed that I was able to just talk about the Cardinal Virtues a little bit, that I was able to just kind of share some of the gospel message, right? So that's important. It's good to ask for things, right? You who ask your Father in secret, he will hear in secret, right? So, and so I pray for things all the time. I pray that I have a great relationship and a great marriage. I prayed like heck that I could leave LA and get a job and serve him. And God has so far placed me at the Augustine Institute. That I very much believe. But it's not just all about me. God, I wish I got this promotion. God, I wish Stephanie fell off a cliff, whatever it is. Prayer is about conforming our lives. And so part of prayer also needs to be reparation, right? It needs to be, God, I am sorry for my sins. God, I want to grow closer to you. And I know that it's not you who's keeping me back, but it's me, right? It's my fallen nature. And you have raised me to be a son or daughter of you for greater things. And, it also has to be that reparation, thanksgiving, of course. Like, God, I'm grateful for everything, right? I remember I do this all the time. So I've started something, and I think that it would be kind of fun if you tried it maybe. If you stub your toe, you bang your foot, something happens, and our first reaction, right, is to swear about things. You stub your toe, and, a slew of words come out. Try this instead. Try saying, thank you, Lord, because you can work off some purgatory time if you offer it up. Do you remember growing up and how much your mom or dad would say that to you? Walk inside, no, this happened. And your mom looks at you and goes, offer it up. And it's funny because you hate that growing up, but the older you get, the more you see the wisdom in that it's not supposed to just be a flippant thing. It really is. It's an ability for us to It's an ability for us to really turn our eyes upwards to God instead of down towards us and our own dreg heap here. So, that's an important part. And self-control, part of what's good about temperance is that it builds discipline, it builds habit. And if we're going to build habit, because we are creatures of habit, right? You get up every morning, you probably eat the same 1 or 2 cereals, and you go to the same job, and you know what beers you like, and you're going to see the same woman for the rest of your life. So we're creatures of habit. And so the point inside this habit is to form good habits, not bad habits. And certainly I think that prudence needs and fortitude, right? So every man thinks that he could win in any sort of bar fight. I was watching an Onion video the other day, and it was like it turns out that men are 4,000 times more likely to actually overhype their fighting skills than what's actual on the ground. And it cuts this guy, and he's like, I don't want to draw a little bit of blood, but if he just doesn't learn his lesson, I'm just got to take a bar stool and smack him over. And then, it cuts to the footage of these guys trying to get in an actual fight, and it's fake, of course, but they're just like, whoa, man, calm down. So we often we value ourselves as courageous, especially as men, right? Like, I tell my fiance this all the time. I'm like, if a guy messes with you, I'll kill him, or I'll kill him. He tries to cop a feel. He tries to make a pass at you. Oh, I'll kill him. And that's important. But it's about defense of women in that case. So we just kind of chalk up to general bravado, don't we? But real fortitude is standing firm in your beliefs. And I think that a great example of this lately hasn't come from a man, but has come from a woman. I talked about Father Altman's, of course, earlier. But if you watch the I'm going to say the burning of Justice Barrett, right, where she was put to the stake of the Democratic Party, and they attempted to throw everything at her in the kitchen sink, and then they took the kitchen sink back and they chucked it again. What fortitude? She didn't renege on the fact that she's a Roman Catholic, and like a real Roman Catholic, not like these Protestants in Catholic garb, Joe Biden's and Nancy Pelosi's, Father James Martin's of the world. Oh no, that's not very prudent of me. But it's, we by their fruits you shall know them, right? So I'm not passing judgment. I'm just saying that it was nice back in the days when Protestants left the church. And what makes a Protestant? If you disagree with the fundamental tenet of the Catholic faith. And so she's being grilled by fellow papists, and she's not holding to it. She's saying, look, I'm here as a justice and I'm going to stay as a justice, right? And, the Catholic faith obviously illuminates her, right? But look what Feinstein said to her a couple months ago, whatever it was, 2017, right? The dogma lives loudly within you. I was like, that is the highest compliment, because what it shows is that she stands for, she stands in her faith. Simple as that. I like to think that Justice Barrett actually has a giant Sir Thomas More tattoo on her back, because I found a lot of her silence, by that meaning that she just didn't answer what they wanted her to answer, really echoed Sir Thomas More. And he, of all saints, really understood the value of courage in the face of losing your life, in the face of red martyrdom. It would have been easy to just sign the king's marriage thing and move on with your life. But he knew what his worth of his soul was, that he could not go along with something which wasn't true. And for us now as men, standing up for what's wrong in the world. And that starts with ourselves, right? Fortitude means having courage interiorly. And so I know I talk a lot about the exteriors because they're easy to point to, but all this needs to tie back to the interiors. And so part of being a man is being able to close your eyes, look at yourself, and to go, okay, what kind of strength, what kind of courage, what kind of endurance do I want to have? Spiritual life is uber important for me when it comes to fortitude. I need to get way better at my spiritual life. It's easy to go to church and pray on Sundays. It's easy. I love, you can look at my libraries. You could tell I love history and I love apologetics. But it's hard for me to really read books about the rejuvenation of my interior life, which is why I'm piecing through the Imitation of Christ right now, which I would highly recommend to do this. And part of that is just knowing that every day you wake up and you're a Catholic male, and there are things that you just have to do. Fortitude has a lot to do with duty, I think. And as men, that resonates a lot with us. So part of that duty is being able to stand up and to go, okay, what does God desire for me today? What does God desire for me every day? And do I have it or do I not have it? And of course, all of these are related to each other. And that's why prudence is so much the wiser. It's why prudence and determination of each ability allows us to apply the Catholic faith as we need to in every single circumstance. Right? Am I being a good Christian husband when my wife messes up the kitchen, or my wife forgets to do something? And am I going to exude self-control? Am I going to exude justice by not getting mad at her, by turning the other cheek? Right? And we know what justice really means. Justice ties ourselves back to the Father. So, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. So we know that we can't be vengeful. We know that ultimate justice comes to God. God counts each and every one of our peccatores, right? Christ counts each and every one of our virtues. God understands that faith that works is dead. And the inverse is also true, that works without faith is dead. And so, it's important as a man that we understand that we don't control ourselves in this kind of way, right? I can only control Jordan and how Jordan reacts to things. But before I can start fixing every little crusade of the world, I need to start working on myself here, right? Before I talk about the dangers of drunkenness, I have to make sure that I myself am not a drunkard, right? Because I need to make sure that I can actually conform my will to Christ. And so as Catholic men, we grow up, we hear the stories of the saints, we hear the stories of heroic, real witnesses to virtue. And it's time, especially now, that we take this into consideration. So I know it's definitely a little more of a theological video, but I want you to think about something, especially on this, next Sunday, if this comes out later, but it's Sunday for me now, really think about what it means to be a virtuous man, and really think about the examples of virtuous men in your own lives. I think that someone like my grandfather is an extremely virtuous man. Someone that you look at and you say, that's the man I want to be. And I've discovered that the more that you focus on the interior virtues, the less you really do start to take care of the externalities. So at the beginning, I talked about how as men, we like to wrap ourselves up with the car, with the wife, with the job, with the status, with the respect, everything. But at the end of the day, you can't take it with you. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if I was the richest king in the world. It doesn't matter if I became a baron amongst men. It doesn't matter if I became king. God judges us all the same. And he's not going to go, well, it's, congratulations, you made $100 billion in your life. Looks like you're coming in, kiddo. He's going to say, what did you do to feed my sheep? What did you do to the littlest of my people? Did you scandalize anybody? Were you virtuous? Were you prudent? Did you display courage, right? Did you have temperance, right? I gave you these gifts. Did you abuse them or did you use them? Because any misuse of a gift in our spiritual life, in the life of the church, is actually an abuse. So a little bit of food for thought, I know. And I think that part of reclaiming our Catholic masculinity is closing our eyes and taking a very deep look at what it means to be men of virtue interiorly. And I'll leave with this final thing. If we start to be virtuous men, this will spread to our families. You cannot ask for something that you yourself don't have in this regard. So I cannot say to my fiance or to my wife or to my brother or to anybody, you need to be better, if I myself am not willing to take the steps to be better. And we know as Christians that our actions oftentimes speak louder than our words. If you live this kind of life, people will be attracted to you. This is one of the reasons why the Latin Mass and Orthodoxy are growing. Because what we see in those priests and what we see in that life of liturgy and what we see in the life of people who really want to conform themselves to this authentic viewing of Catholicism is this desire to be better. And so I have a very good buddy of mine, a brother I pray for very fervently. And for 4 or 5 years, he's gone from kind of being an agnostic atheist and very worldly to really discerning the spiritual elements of life. Recognizing God as God, not just like the ethereal God, but God as God. And it's funny because all throughout our as we did things together, we had very different worldviews, right? And so that led to very different actions, things that he would do that I would never condone. And so he asked me a couple of points. We've had some of the great debates of history. He asked me about Catholic sexual ethics, right? And how much fortitude and temperance that really takes. And he's asked me about the prudence that it takes. And we have all the back and forths. And one thing I'm reminded of is something that St. Paul talks about, which is, and I can't remember quite where it comes from, but I do know that the gist is, if the gospel isn't true, Christians are really the most miserable people on the world, right? Because there we go. What does he say? He says, why not we just eat, drink, and be merry, for tonight we die? Like, if the gospel isn't true, then what the heck are we doing this all for? What is the point of having an authentic Christian life? Do you imagine how much self-control and restraint you've had, right? How many women you haven't been with, how many drinks you haven't gone to excess, how many drugs you haven't done, how much power you haven't grasped, everything. Because the gospel's true. And if it's not, wow, we denied ourselves so many pleasures, so many temporaries for the kingdom that didn't exist. However, the kingdom does exist. And God wants us to work here. We work out our salvation in fear and trembling for the sake of the kingdom. And so it's important. It's important. It cannot be. And also the best part is that it's inside the truth of Christ that we get set free. Having temperance in my relationship isn't a crutch, right? It's not a crutch that Jen and I can't sleep together. Or one day we will in 8 months, right? Because we'll be married. But it's actually been great because what it's allowed us to happen is now we have this authentic friendship and we have this authentic understanding of each other as person. So in the world of cohabitation, where people just jump into bed with each other, look at the disasters that it's caused. Divorce, contraception, abortion, never mind the loss of millions of souls, psychological problems, right? Feeling unwanted and unloved, looking for love in all the wrong places. And I think this is why time after time what they find is that Christians are happy people. How can you be happy if you're not giving into debauchery? Because we know that we're oriented in the truth, and the truth makes us happy. And it's inside the freedom of the virtues that we're allowed to actually express ourselves fully as the men that God intends us to be. So I pray for you all. I really earnestly do. And really meditate, I think, on the 4 cardinal virtues. Maybe find one that you want to really latch onto today. I'm going to really work on Fortitude today. I think Fortitude sounds like a good one. That I'm not going to be intimidated or shy about the gospel message. And ultimately, it's Christ who wants us to come into our fulfillment as his son. So God bless you. May I keep you. I'll see you on the next one. Adios.